minutes.
Thank you all for being here. I think I'll start with Mr. Reynes from the Peace Bridge. This whole idea of the Americans wanting to scan 100% of the trucks, I find very interesting in many ways. Is this a policy that they want to institute at every border crossing, or just starting with major ones? You mentioned a 2026 timeline, I think.
So the legislation is very clear. It indicates that by 2026, CBS or CBP, Customs and Border Protection, must have a plan for every truck entering the U.S. southern border and northern border. So they're phasing it in. The largest acquisition that U.S. Customs has undertaken is the acquisition of non-intrusive inspection equipment. Over the last couple of years, 3-4 years, I think it's in excess of $1 billion. A number of southern ports have already gone 100% inspection for obvious reasons, but it is coming to the northern border, and at Peace Bridge, we will be the first border crossing, but it's coming to all of them.
So, and you mentioned that the biggest truck volume border crossings in Canada are those bridges. West of the Great Lakes, of course, the border is just a line in the dirt, and so the trucks are crossing on roads. Maybe if, I'm just fascinated to hear about this technology. You say it's done as the trucks are moving across the bridges?
Correct. The new technology is called multi-energy portal. So the cab gets scanned at a low dosage, if you want to call it that, and then the cab is a much higher energy. So yes, every truck can be done. It's done now at some ports, and every port has some form of X-ray equipment. But what happens now is the driver has to get out of the truck. And so it's done even at the land border crossings. Every truck going into the U.S. has X-ray equipment. The new technology is much more efficient in terms of allowing trucks to do it at motion at 5 miles per hour. So when you have a port like ours that has 5,000 trucks a day crossing, it's important that we keep these trucks moving. If you go to 100% with the driver having to get out, the borders come to gridlock.
And so this phase-in will happen over the next year and a half, I assume?
It's happening now.
Right.
Sometimes these schedules slip, as has oftentimes happened, but the schedule in the legislation is 2026.
And so, and you're suggesting that in many cases that this will happen in Canada before, I mean, the scanning has to happen before the trucks enter the United States?
It doesn't have to happen in Canada. What I'm saying is if it happens in Canada, it means the truck doesn't have to stop on the U.S. side to get adjudicated. So the way it works is the truck gets scanned, and then there's a command center where there's people that are watching the scan. It's going to be replaced by artificial intelligence in a few years, but it still has to, the truck has to sit there and wait. The beauty of putting it in Canada is it allows that adjudication to take place while the truck is crossing the bridge, the 2 to 3 minutes. Otherwise, it has to sit there and wait for 2 to 3 minutes. And that backs up very quickly if you can't do it while it's in motion.
Okay, this is, and what are the, and I'm sorry if I was caught up in all this while you were giving your statement. So, and what are the real challenges for us right now that the federal government could help in?
Well, I think there's two things. One is being aware that it's happening, and it could have a big impact if we're not ready for it by 2026. And the second thing is we want to include facial verification. Customs already has the photograph of the drivers in their system. What we're saying is include that in the information packet of the cargo being scanned and the drivers and the license plate being scanned and the RFID technology and all that. Include the facial identity, because those trucks that are scanned must go to the U.S. The opt-out, if a truck doesn't want to do that, is before the scanning. Once it's scanned, it has to go to the U.S. Include the facial piece in there, because then everything can be adjudicated and there will be no need to stop at the U.S. primary inspection booth, which facilitates the movement of Canadian exports into the U.S.
And do you see this happening at the land border crossings, like Pacific border crossing in British Columbia and places like that?
Yes, it will be happening at every port of entry coming into the U.S. The non-intrusive inspection will be there. What we're saying is at the big crossings, when you have a bridge where there's going to be time to adjudicate, why not put the technology on the Canadian side? Because it facilitates the movement of goods and traffic. It happens very similar in many ways to what happens at airports in the pre-clearance mode, where people are actually cleared in Canada, and then when they get to the U.S. side, they're free to go.
Right. And that, in airports, that includes a facial recognition
Yes.
piece? I mean, when I
Yes.
have to stand there
Yes.
and get, it never works for me.
We're not part of the pre-clearance model
Right.
because this is in the cargo environment, which is different, but the principle is very much the same.
Right. And the Canadian government is concerned about the facial recognition piece?
They were when we made our original National Trade Corridor Fund application. So we got approved. We got an IBTA, International Bridge and Tunnels Act permit to do the technology, but did not include facial verification. So we have applied again at the beginning of March. We applied to Transport Canada to add the facial verification piece. We haven't heard anything yet as to whether that will be approved or not. What I'm saying is we're building it this summer. It would be nice to incorporate it now and allow us to have the full package done by the end of the year.
And
0 seconds left.
0 seconds, sorry. I could go on.
Mr. Seebeck, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to jump back on something that Mr. Aria was trying to say about trade. So actual trade volume in Canada went down from the latest State of Trade report. The actual dollar value went up, but the actual volume of trade went down. And it went up because of inflation and things like the carbon tax. So same thing with our percentage of the U.S. market. While our trade value may have gone up because of inflation and the carbon tax, we've lost market share. When you're losing market share, you're losing. It's why we're now their third largest trading partner. You can try and put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And that's the Liberal record on trade. And part of the problem is infrastructure and our trade infrastructure. We know the Canada West Foundation put out a report that our trade infrastructure has precipitously declined in the last 12 years. So I wanted to ask Mr. Weller a question. To add to the problems with this, the radical Liberal environment minister said we shouldn't invest in roads anymore. Like roads are these terrible things. I think roads are critical for trade. I suspect everyone here might agree with that. And we probably need to expand our roads to be able to expand trade. Mr. Weller, would you like to comment on that?
Sure, Madam Chair, through you. Regardless of whether our future is a green economy or not, infrastructure is going to be a critical piece of it. So in order to meet the needs that we're going to need for green energy, for solar panels, EV production, requires not just having the resources of minerals, but the extraction of the minerals, the processing of the minerals on a scale that we haven't seen before. We're talking about an industrial build-out we haven't seen before, which is why I mentioned that we need to reindustrialize. Frankly, from a practitioner's perspective, the goals that have been set are not attainable in the current environment. We probably should have started years ago to get there. It's not the popular answer, but that is the reality of it. Yeah, you're going to need roads for sure. You're going to need infrastructure. You're going to need power grid updates. You're going to need municipal infrastructures to support the communities that are involved where this is going on, and on and on and on. And you are going to need some sort of overarching coordination of all of it, not the individual pieces of it. But in order to actually get an overall benefit to the entire system, you have to coordinate all of it together. And that's what I refer to when I say a whole system thinking approach.
With infrastructure. So part of supply chains are going to be infrastructure. So the government actually commissioned a report, the National Supply Chain Task Force report, and it said that we have major investments needed in highway and road structures and other networks, 3.3 trillion, right? And this includes railways and ports and everything else. But I was shocked to see in the federal budget there is virtually no investment actually in this critical infrastructure. Canada's a trading nation. Like 60 to 70% of our GDP comes from trade. So these investments are sort of critical. What do you think about where we are on the investments that we're getting to support supply chain and trade infrastructure with what the government seems to be offering?
Sure. Well, again, I'm going to speak from purely from the manufacturing perspective, because that's the background from which I'm involved. I think we simply need more investment towards productivity. So when we talk about supply chain, when we talk about export, when we talk about export development, increasing trade, when we talk about any of these things, what we're ultimately talking about is productivity. That is the measure as far as a national economy is concerned. I don't need to go into detail about the Bank of Canada's recent statement about productivity. Everybody in this room knows the numbers. I don't need to quote them. I would say that the record has been poor, and that is not to denigrate any political party, but I say that with the optimism that we can do better once we start to see how these pieces actually fit together. We can coordinate a response to that and improve it. I think we can improve it. Canada is rich with resources. We need to focus on being able to process those resources, not just sell them, so that we can buy them back down the road, further down the value chain at a higher value.
Can do in 16 seconds. Thanks,
Okay,
Madam Chair.
thank you very much. Mr. Badaway for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having me on committee today, and I do appreciate the presence of all the witnesses here this afternoon. I'm going to start off by saying this, that throughout both the United States and Canada, leaders are prioritizing regionally based hubs. Where the production happens, they're concentrating on those areas where the sales happen within some regions to streamline logistics, improve inventory management, and accelerate response to market demand. With that, this committee has taken on a supply chain study. There's outcomes that are expected to come out of this study. You folks are tasked on your daily, with your daily business and everything that you're doing on a daily basis to help move goods and people, to create that fluidity, and then secondly, to look at different mechanisms that we as government, whether it be policy or financial investments, that we as government can actually partner with you to then help you meet your goals. So with that said, I do want to first concentrate on Mr. Hamilton with respect to some of the projects that the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority is working on right now. I know in Niagara, being a Niagara Member of Parliament, we've been very successful at integrating our multimodal network, looking at land acquisition and really creating a new economy. I know we can't talk about much of that new economy yet. There will be a day for that. But with that said, Mr. Hamilton, and next I'm going to go to Mayor Steele. What are some of the wins that are happening both not only in Niagara but also in Hamilton and Oshawa? Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Vince. Parliament Secretary, what we've focused on is one of our vision is to create and lead an integrated port network in Southern Ontario. And what we've really wanted to try to do is to combine together assets so that we can ensure that the cargo is moving through the most efficient supply chain and the most efficient port of entry, but also we can concentrate the infrastructure investment so we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Now in Hamilton, one of our challenges has been that we've run out of space, and the space that we do have is becoming increasingly expensive. And looking towards the Niagara region, we saw a real opportunity to take advantage of the industrial space that was available, access to the marine as a supply chain through the Welland Canal, and a good road network and proximity to the U.S. border. So over the last couple of years, as we've entered into Niagara, we've been able to, with our partners, invest about $100 million, and now have about 800 acres that we've been developing, and home to 12 tenants, all of which are really there because of their access to great supply chains. Where we see future investments is better utilizing particularly the St. Lawrence Seaway, and how do we get better access to the water, and again give these companies better, more sustainable and robust supply chains by combining that multimodal nature of road, rail, and marine together.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. And obviously that is creating some productivity within the region as well as within the province of Ontario.
Yes, certainly where we look at it is that for every dollar we spend, we're probably able to attract an additional $8.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. To Mayor Steele, can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, with Port Colborne and being the gateway to navigation for the Welland Canal on Lake Erie, the open land that's been left from former industrial sites and right from the water, Lake Erie water to our north end border with Welland. We've got vast tracts of land. Some of that's under the control of private enterprise, and some with the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority. Now with HOPA coming in for a number of acres within the city, we're looking to enhance that marine industry. And I'm glad Jean Aubry spoke about the big project in Port Colborne, approximately $45 million to rehabilitate Wharf 18, 1, 2, and 3, which has been out of service for approximately 10 to 15 years. And the private enterprise that they have partnering with them on that project. Ian's project on the old Algoma steel plant, getting that back into service with, as Ian talked about, multimodal. I mean, Port Colborne's lucky, and Vance, as you served as mayor of Port Colborne for quite a long time, and I served with you as a councillor. But we own our own rail. We own our own port here alongside the St. Lawrence Seaway. We run our own government, the former government elevator for grain that passes from the Upper Lakes down in through Niagara and then out to the seas to foreign markets. But there's so much land here that could be redeveloped along the canal. But it is infrastructure money, has been talked about by many witnesses here today. But it really needs to be coordinated between all of us, both private and the public sector, so that we get these lands developed as fast as possible and get them out to market. We're developing a brand new commercial industrial subdivision that's right alongside the St. Lawrence Seaway Canal. But with us is private enterprise with about 600 acres. The St. Lawrence Seaway with probably about 100 acres approximately there, and then the city of Port Colborne with another about 80 acres that we're developing. So we all need to work together. We need to get the companies that are coming to Canada. And quite frankly, I think you're going to see more and more. I think the Honda announcement last Thursday in Alliston is really the tip of the iceberg, and it's really bodes well for the political climate of North America, both in Canada and the U.S. When you've got the issues in Asia, you've got the issues in the Mideast, and quite frankly, some issues in Europe right now that you're looking at having companies move here. Port Colborne is seeing a company called Youngblood or JBL as we call them. They're one of the largest citric acid plants in the world. They're moving a new xanthan gum plant to Port Colborne. It's going to double the size of their plant. So these are just things that are coming along, but we need to be ready. And we quite frankly, we need to be ready yesterday, not tomorrow.
Okay,
Thank you.
Very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5.
Oui, mais suivrai la
Thank
discussion.
you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pick up where I left off with Mr. Morin. So some stakeholders, and I'm coming back to the question of the review of the St. Lawrence that was undertaken, some stakeholders said that reviewing the cabotage and piloting system could make the Seaway more competitive. Is this something that is it a view that you share? Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. When we talk about supply chains, we talk about fluidity and movement. So the quickness for moving products is part of the solution. So either through the use of technology or by coordinating the movement. And so regardless of the contributing factor, yes, the answer is, as Mr. Weller and Rena were saying, products have to be moving continuously. And that's the success of the Seaway. It's because we've invested in technology to ensure that coordination. So what needs to be changed and what has already been done so far? Thank you. So what we're doing right now is putting in place a third generation of ship management system and coordination of multimodal transportation so that things are quick and efficient. So that we can make decisions proactively to avoid delays and stoppages. So that's the technology. We're developing technology at this moment with, and so that it includes piloting in the Great Lakes and other actors, so whether they're ports or logistics related. Thank you. All right, it's 17 seconds. I think that's not enough time to ask a question.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to turn to Mr. Weller, and I only have 2.5 minutes. And you talked about a reindustrialization strategy. I don't know if you can talk about that in 2.5 minutes, but I just would like to know what caused our deindustrialization and what have we learned in recent years, especially during the pandemic, about our supply chains that we can reindustrialize and make those supply chains more resilient.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's a lot in that question to unpack. I will try as quickly as I can to reiterate what caused the failures. Several things. We had, beginning in the late 90s, we had a lot going on. It got worse with, I said we were at our peak in the late 90s. What basically happened was you had the financial crisis that happened in 2008, kind of pushed us over a cliff. Canada's dollar became par, which hurt a lot of manufacturers. And between 2001 and 2010, Canada's medium manufacturers shrank by 51%. At the same point in time, imports from China grew by 456%. So competition on a global scale is kind of what led to the demise. We've never recovered. And that from an employment perspective, the data shows that we haven't recovered yet. We're not picking up.
So basically that globalization has caused that deindustrialization, and what can we do to?
Well, sure. So this is why I say reindustrialize. When we talk about supply chain, we talk about trade, we talk about export, we talk about purchasing, we talk about manufacturing. These things on their own are no more supply chain than a set of tires as a car, right? They're components of supply chain, but when we're talking about supply chain, we need to talk about the whole system. There has to be an overarching balance struck in terms of coordinating all those efforts, all those resources, which are necessary. Don't get me wrong. They're absolutely, everything we have going on in Canada is necessary. I don't wish to take away from any of that. But we need to coordinate it in a level that looks to the future, to the scale that we're going to need it. The world is breaking down on a globalized scale. Right now, we depend on a lot of imports. We have retired and outsourced a lot of our capabilities. We need to get them back, not only for our own sake, but also to now export to others who it's less advantageous for them to have the same skills. This can be coordinated. When I say reindustrialization, it's an opportunity to set a strategy that will cover investments, infrastructure, and everything else to bring it all together in a coordinated way where we're not satisfying ourselves in the present and hurting ourselves in the future.
For that information, Mr. General, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to, just a quick question, then share my time with one of the hardest working members of Parliament there is from Niagara Falls, Mr. Baldinelli, after this. First of all, though, Mr. Reynes, you talked about flagpoling, and I think that's maybe you kind of glanced over at the beginning of your testimony, and wouldn't mind if you kind of just maybe flesh that out in a bit more detail on certain things that the federal government can do, because I think that's certainly something that should be part of our report going forward.
Yeah, so my whole point is that you can invest tons of money in infrastructure, but if you don't have policies to support that, or policies that actually hurt that investment, you really kind of are defeating yourself. So what happens with flagpoling is we have IRCC. During the pandemic, when you couldn't go to the border, they had an online system, and if you applied before your work permit or your residency permit expired, you were given what was called implied status. Once the border reopened, went back to the old way. People apply, they don't get their approvals for 9 months, 12 months. In between, their work permit is expiring. So to assure themselves that they can stay in Canada, they go to the border because there they have to be processed immediately. The problem is it ties up U.S. customs officers, which means they're not out there working to clear trucks going into the U.S. So you understand how it all kind of fits together. And then when they get their paperwork refusal in the U.S., they come over to Canada. They have to go into secondary, tie up CBSA officers that aren't out working primary to allow imports to come into Canada or tourists to come into Canada. So to me, it's quite simple. Go back to what you did during the pandemic. Give people implied status and say, don't go to the border. Do it the way it should be done in 2024. Do it online. And more importantly, have a service standard that says you're going to get your work permit within 21 days of applying for it, or 30 days. So there's no need to wait 9 months and fear losing your work permit. To me, it's low-hanging fruit that should be addressed.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleague for ceding some time. Recently, the St. Lawrence Seaway announced that nearly 38 million tons of cargo transited the binational seaway in 2023, so that's up 3.4%. I mean, that relation and that growth leads to jobs and job creation. And I mean, if you think about Niagara, we're within an 8 hours drive, and we've got the seaway there of hundreds of millions of people within that area. Mayor Steele, you talk of the need of collaboration and your work and your efforts with both HOPA and the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority, and how we can unleash the potential of Niagara. You know, the National Supply Chain Task Force indicated over a 50-year period from 2020 to 2070, investments of about $4.4 trillion going to be needed, and the majority of that is going to be in the road structures, about $3.3 trillion. There had been talk in Niagara for a long time of the need for a mid-peninsula corridor. It would tie nicely into the whole multimodal aspect of what's going on in terms of the investments and trade that happened in Niagara. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Thanks for the question. Yes, I mean that goes back quite a long time ago, and it keeps popping its head up from time to time. It's probably a project that still should be looked at, especially to move trucks between the Peace Bridge, where Mr. Reines is, all the way up to the Hamilton Airport, which is one of the largest cargo airports in Canada, and then across the 403, 401 corridor. I mean, it would alleviate a lot of the QEW coming in from the GTA down into Niagara over the Burlington Skyway, and at least it'll get people moving faster. But quite frankly, it's more than just highways. It's actually our rail system. Our rail system, quite frankly, in Niagara isn't the greatest system. There are some inefficiencies there. I think, you know, we ripped out lots of tracks over the years, and then now we look back and say, geez, I wish we had those again. Specifically, the Buffalo to Detroit line that followed Highway 3 all the way from the Buffalo Fort Erie to Windsor, Detroit. I mean, having that line today would alleviate a lot of things. I think one thing I've said and a lot of the other people have said today is the fact that, you know, we're not here to take away rail or trucking and making everything go through the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority with shipping. We're trying to meld everybody together so that we can all work together, but instead of trucks traveling for hours and hours on end, we can actually ship more, and a number of people, both Ian and Jean-Abri, spoke about this with regards to the cargo on the ships and how many trucks it takes off the road, how many rail cars it takes off the rails. But short line rail is something that we can look at for Southern Ontario. Also, short trucking with a lot of firms. Just in our neighborhood, we have one short line trucking firm that travels in Southern Ontario for all the goods for the markets that he deals with. Those things need to be looked at, and that's how you look at the environmental aspect of this and getting rid of CO2, and also looking at the electrification of shipping. Hydrogen fuel for shipping is another thing. A possibility is how we're going to look at even airlines with biofuel from grain for the airlines, and how we can start processing those types of commodities here in Southern Ontario within Niagara.
Okay, thanks. So you're way over. Thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be sharing some time with Vince. Very hardworking former mayor in the Niagara regions too, as well. The My first question is, of course, to the FedDev, and I would be remiss without acknowledging your work in steel. I'm co-chair of the All-Party Steel Caucus, and recently we had Ambassador to Japan in Sault Ste. Marie, and he was certainly pointing out something you alluded to was the EV supply chains that we haven't talked a lot about. But could you talk and expand a little bit more about the opportunities for, say, the steel industry and other industries as it relates to the EV battery announcement that Honda recently made? A lot has been talked about the mining, a lot of talking about the car production, but you know, the investments both in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie. And Sault Ste. Marie was a $420 million announcement, which is generational in funding. We were saying that in 2021. I was glad to hear it again and again and again. It's going to anchor Sault Ste. Marie for a long time because if you recall, FedDev did make an announcement with the previous federal conservative government. I remember on July 24th, 2015, I won't forget the date, because it was a week later there was an election. However, after I had won, I was called to a meeting even before I was sworn in, and Algoma Steel was going into restructuring. So, you know, that's another debate about the kind of due diligence that the previous government had done in that. But on this particular investment, it's going to take 1 million cars off the road, close to it, gas-powered. And where else do you see these supply chains, you know, expand on the Algoma Steel example? Because the ambassador was very impressed because he made the point, and a lot of people made the point, it's not just governments, it's the market, it's the people. Like someone who wants to drive an electric vehicle, if there was somebody who was competing against that steel industry, would point out, well, that's being made with coal. So perhaps if you'd like to expand on that, and then after you're done, I'll pass my time to Vance.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the question. As I noted in my opening remarks, the transition to electric vehicle production in Southern Ontario has been quite rapid and transformational in creating a number of supply chain opportunities across the region. Certainly with large steel producers and those, you know, both with Algoma and what's happening with Dofasco down in Hamilton in terms of greening their operations, tremendous opportunity to connect green steel products into the production processes for automotive parts, supplying EV production going forward. I think there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity to build that corridor to connect some of the resource extraction around critical minerals in Northern Ontario and get them down to market through the south. And we're already seeing some talk of that around a North to Niagara type corridor emerging. I think what's truly unique about our region when it comes to the EV supply chain is that it is one of the only jurisdictions in North America where you have that overlap of a very dense technology cluster with a very dense manufacturing cluster. And that opens up a whole new range of opportunities for suppliers, not just when it comes to traditional manufacturing, but also on the automotive technology side and being able to leverage new technologies, including artificial intelligence, cybersecurity-based solutions to drive the component parts of the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Terry. I guess I'll say this. You know, we're not here to speak. We're here to allow you to speak, and therefore getting on the record to the analysts your desires and of course, your expectations. Fluidity, capital investments, data, digital, list goes on. You know, we heard from Mr. Hamilton with respect to the establishment of the Niagara Trade Corridor. We worked very hard on that with Hamilton and Oshawa. We know the economic investments that are underway. We know the economic investments that are going to happen. The supply chain and logistics strategy is something that I hope comes out of this as an outcome of this committee. As the PS Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, it's something that I'm very eager to start on with our partners within the Supply Chain Office. We've heard from HOPA once again of what their successes were within the investments that they're making along, especially the Welland Canal Corridor. So I guess my question is to Mr. Jean-Aubry Morand with respect to their intentions on behalf of the Seaway to economically develop the Welland Canal Corridor in partnership with a lot of the stakeholders that are existing there today. Mr. Morand?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Badaway, thanks for your question. I think I'm going to start with one word: collaboration. Collaboration. Right now, there's 6 major projects along the Welland Canal as a corridor that we've put our basically support and expertise behind to make sure that the promoter themselves, the community, and elected official also have all the technical support necessary to be able to, from the concept level to the project situation, that all the gaps and all the hurdles are removed as much as possible. So every dollar that could be invested in the corridor could get its full potential. So to go back to a comment that was made before, and I think, Mr. Badaway, you mentioned it, fluidity equals productivity when it's not obtained, it's not abated. So full fluidity will give us what we need. So what we're doing right now is supporting all these projects. And I think the one that we're talking about a minute ago about EV, critical mineral, water and power are 3 ingredients that will permit the supply chain in that case to be able to be successful. And that's the full support and collaborative contribution we're doing.
Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses to be here. My question is for Mr. Morin. Mr. Morin, you said earlier that there is a potential for the export growth. We have the capacity to support more. So what I'm thinking is, what are the current obstacles that makes it so that we're not here? Madam Chair, Mr. Martel, I think the easiest way to respond to your question is to talk about all the delays and on all the inconveniences that make it so that the movement of goods and cargoes and all the various the shipping, whether it's by rail or sea or anything, it is delayed for all the reasons that were mentioned by my colleagues here. So we're talking about having a certain volume that we're capable of having on a network, but we're not using it to its maximum value. And we have a great loss. So we're talking about having a system that would maximize the use of those resources, including the seaways, by putting into place a system that would allow for management in real time of the data that are required for decisions to be made, whether it's piloting, moving, and the use of the various infrastructures on the seaway. Okay, we know that the level of trust of businesses in the face of infrastructure in this country have really dropped, and we are at the 32nd rank in the world. So knowing that your business has a new agreement since March with Transport Canada, is there a solution in that agreement? Through the chair, I would like to talk about the model productivity that we did. If we talk about the investment that we have done in innovation since the commercialization in 1998, we were able to double the productivity in the seaway. We were talking about the scanners for CBSA. We were talking about the use of automatic pilot. If we had the same kind of if we had the same approach so that it would help with the decision, if this was replicated throughout the system, we could see rapidly how the agreement, the long-term agreement that we have signed with the federal government would allow us to be an influential actor and a collaboration actor with the other agencies so that we could basically replicate the same business model. So our current issues in the transport infrastructure, what are those issues and those challenges, and what do you suggest? Madam Speaker, I missed the beginning of the question. Could you please repeat? What I would like to know based on your perspective, what are the biggest issues when it comes to transport infrastructure, and what are the solutions that you are suggesting? Madam Chair, what made the Seaway the success that it is that we can see that we are a very strong link in the transport chain. So the reliability and each of the dollar that has been invested has had a greater return. When we were investing several million in a lock that lived for 80 years, 25 years ago, the same dollar allows us to have a lock that now can live over 120 years. So we can invest with a much better return on investment. And thus we will be able to have a reliability, which with fluidity will bring us to being to, previsibility or the possibility to be dependent on the system. And this will definitely help us along the supply chain. So more reliability and therefore more productivity as a result. My next question was for Mr. Hamilton. I wanted for him to talk more about the short distance maritime transport. How would this improve our supply chain? I don't know if you're able to respond in 15 seconds. Mr. Hamilton?
I'm going to suggest that perhaps if he wants, he can submit the answer to that question in writing. And we'll now move to Mr. Badaway for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've heard a lot of the investments that are being made. I know Mayor Steele, as well as Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Jean-Aubry Morin spoke about some of the activities happening in the Niagara region and southwestern Ontario. I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton if he can hear me. Ian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
He's trying to respond. I'm not sure he can respond. I was going to.
He might try to unplug his headset and plug it back in again.
Unplug your headset and plug it back in. And put your boom down on your mic too.
I'm gonna hold your time, Mr. Badaway.
Okay, no problem. Ian, put your boom down.
Is that better now?
Your mic. That's it.
Is that better now?
That's better. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So I guess I talked and spoke about the establishment of the Niagara Ports Trade Corridor. Mr. Baldinelli brought up the investment on the Mid-Peninsula Corridor. Thank you for that. We spoke about the productivity that's happening, maybe possibly an anomaly in Canada, but what's happening in Niagara, based on a lot of the work that all the partners are doing together, the collaboration, et cetera. I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton now the same question I asked Mr. Moran with respect to that corridor and his thoughts on how we expand the economic activity along that corridor. Second question is, do you think that a port authority being established along the Welland Canal Corridor would be beneficial? And lastly is the development of properties that are currently managed by the St. Lawrence Seaway, some of which now are managed by the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority, owned by Transport Canada, how that would play into the both productivity as well as the land or the economic development within the Niagara region. Mr. Hamilton?
Great, thank you for the question, and I'll build on Mr. Moran's statement around collaboration, and certainly we see that as the foundation for developing Niagara. Right now, there's been a very positive reception with both the region and all of the municipalities along the Welland Canal for HOPA to come in and do what we can to develop the area. In terms of in addition to just collaboration, I think there needs to be actual dollars and cents, infrastructure money spent to develop the facilities along the Welland Canal so that they can be we can really tap into their potential. One of the key areas is marrying together the different modes of transportation, ensuring that customers today have that modal choice. And it was brought up earlier that we're not necessarily trying to move everything to marine, but making sure that we can create the most sustainable supply chains, and that's marrying together rail, marine, and road, and giving the ability to structure the supply chains in a way that has the most beneficial attributes in terms of cost, environmental impact, and social benefits by reducing congestion. I certainly believe that the track record of HOPA in both Oshawa and in particular in Hamilton, and the start we're off to in Niagara would suggest that we could take on lands in along the Welland Canal, and in partnership with the St. Lawrence Seaway, find a very happy marriage where we can make the investments and work on that creation of those multimodal hubs, and drive more cargo to the Seaway, and would applaud the expansion of authority into the Niagara region. And in a lot of ways, this may have already happened by lands being transferred to HOPA's letters patent in the last few months.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Final question to Mr. Reines. With the Niagara multimodal trade corridor being established, and of course, one would think it would only be between lake to lake, along the Welland Canal corridor. How do you see in the future the town of Fort Erie, the Peace Bridge in particular, being a part of that multimodal trade corridor, especially as it relates to fluidity?
Well, as has been talked about before, there's a lot of interconnectivity between all the modes of transportation. So material that comes into Hamilton gets loaded on a truck from short sea shipping. At some point, a lot of times it has to cross the border. So it's all related. The more we can do to make sure that the border functions at the border, there's been a lot of investment in infrastructure. It's the non-infrastructure stuff that really needs work in terms of processing time. No point putting a lot of money into building a new port of entry or expanding a port of entry and having 15 primary inspection booths if you're only going to staff half of them. So it's not just infrastructure, it's the human capital, the human resources, it's the processes, it's the procedures. All of it has to be interconnected amongst all the modes.
Thanks, Kyle.
Merci. Alors, continuons notre échange. Monsieur Morin.
Thank you. So let's continue, Mr. Morin. There are several briefs that were submitted. Affirming that the mandate of the corporation could be updated to include, economic development. It was suggested that the corporation could possibly get back some operating copies, find some new trade openings, and then find new revenues that would not be from the toll. So in your opinion, what would be the advantage of giving you new powers like that? Thank you very much for the question, through the chair. I think that the notion of the competitivity when we talk about looking for revenues is something that must be exploited with great care and great prudence. I just want to talk about a notion that was explained earlier, right off the bat, that the Seaway, in fact, feeds a market that would be the third world economy if it was a country. So the Seaway represents the flow of goods and cargoes from the US and Canada that goes through the Welland Canal and others. So being able to help the investment or the development of this network, and also to create a value in the Canadian and American economies. When it comes to the Seaway itself, it is a nonprofit corporation which can cover its own cost. And since it's marketing in terms of $1 of the year, it was able to be at least at the same level as when it started in 1998. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes. Another question. Your board of directors has representative of the provincial, federal level, and administrators that are named by the industry that are going to represent the carriers and sectors like cereals or steel. do you think it would be possible to open positions for other groups, like we were talking earlier about the indigenous group? Could they have a representative, union representative? Would that be possible too, municipal representative?
Oui. Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair, this question is more of the political nature, and the federal government decide.
We'll now turn to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to go back to Mr. Weller and just try to pick up where I left off with some complicated questions on, you know, in the middle of the pandemic or after the pandemic, you know, we learned that maybe these long supply chains weren't such a good idea. I know Canada and the U.S. have been talking about this nearshoring, friendshoring. What has Canada done since, you know, I know various reports have come out on this. What has Canada done and what should it be doing to help build that ecosystem, if that's what you call it, that would help us, you know, keep things under control and not be so out there when it comes to natural disasters or pandemics or whatever could hit us?
So colleagues going to interrupt. The bells are ringing, so we would need unanimous consent to continue. I would suggest that we continue with this final round of question for about 1.5 minutes, and then we adjourn so people can vote. Is that the agreement of the committee? Great.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak to what needs to happen, if that makes sense, and what isn't really happening yet. And I will keep this, again, in the context of small and medium manufacturers, okay? A lot of the problems we've gotten into in the first place come from, and this is not to denigrate our manufacturing community at all, right? But it comes from a lack of executional knowledge. And what I mean by that is, there's an old saying, you have to be effective before you can be efficient. We have to relearn how to be effective. And the challenges against that, and the pandemic is what exposed this, is that we have a brain drain going on. We have several companies that have retiring owners and executives that have knowledge. That knowledge is not necessarily coming in behind them. It's leaving with them, right? We have to start educating a new generation of manufacturing on how to be effective and how to be productive. I'll give you a short analogy. I've heard many people, many learned people say that the biggest problems were just-in-time manufacturing from the pandemic. I couldn't disagree more. That is actually an example of the lack of knowledge that I am speaking to. Because just-in-time, people associate that with saying, well, you need no inventory, right? What it means is that it's a waste to have inventory that you don't need.